Today we're going to be talking about why people like Chrisean Rock and Blue Face stay together and get together in the first place. And what we're going to be talking about specifically is how society is toxic for broken people, because I think a lot of people today sit on their high horse of self-righteousness, of like, they look at people like Chrisean and Blue Face and they sit there and they say stuff like, oh, these guys, they need to just stop doing what they're doing. Then she needs to walk away from him because he's abusive, and they need to go and do this and they need to go and do that. Everybody has a prescription and everybody thinks that they know what these guys need to do. And what I've often found is that a lot of people who come from more stable homes than another type of person, or more stable background, can be so out of touch with understanding of how these things come to be in the first place, and then feel that like, oh well, so for example, guys, I'll give you this very simple example, right? You'll have somebody say, you have a lot of people will say stuff like, oh, if she's not a virgin, I don't want her, right? Now, there are plenty of women who are virgins. You'll most likely find they come from very stable, happy homes that operate in a somewhat traditional sense. And when I say somewhat traditional sense, what I purely mean a masculine father and a feminine mother who love and respect and support each other and take their parenting more seriously than just providing food and shelter as if their child was a pet, right? So that's what I think people fail to understand. Because if you look at the backgrounds, which I'm going to be talking a lot about Chrisean Rock, this is going to be a whole series, by the way, guys, of a couple of videos that I'm going to do in separate parts, because there's separate things I want to talk about separately. And we're going to get to a specific destination of why I think this is important and how we can use this situation for all of us and for herself as well, because I really believe she's going to make it out of this to win in life. Because there's a reason why a lot of people are turning out to be the Chrisean Rocks and the Blue Faces. There's a reason why people fall into these relationships, because what I can see from what I've seen, that this relationship that these guys have is better, probably better, even though we might look at it and see it as toxic, it's probably healthier than the situations they've been in. And that's what people miss. So when you're trying to explain to a person, this is why I think people in society just need to shut the flip up, and why God tells us to forgive everybody, because you don't know where they come from, not to judge anyone because you don't know their story, right? And it really irritates me how people will say, oh, now that I know about your background, I understand why you were like this. Before I was judging you, before I was calling you out, before I was being unforgiving, but now that I know, which is what I think is so unfair, because people shouldn't have to tell you their story. You shouldn't have to look into somebody's whole story. The evidence is right in front of you. Like, that's what I don't get about people. When people see this behavior, like, the behavior itself is the sign, is the sign of what's gone on or what's going on. So even when people say, like, for example, things like, oh, women, like modern women, and like the way we dress and this, like, you should just cover up, because if you don't cover up, you don't have self-respect. Exactly, that's the point. They don't have self-respect. So you just telling them that's not going to change anything. And that's why I think a lot of people are out of touch. You have to deal with things at the root cause. Like, I always use Kris Jenner as an example of this. I'm not going to talk about her actually here, because I'm going to talk about this in another video. But what I'm trying to say here is that we in society have a tendency, I can't say we, because personally I've learned from the love of God, first of all, loving me at my worst and not judging me and forgiving me for everything, right? I don't judge nobody. And if I see somebody like that, I more feel hurt and like I want to help, then I'm going to sit there and judge and start saying, oh, you need to do this, you need to do that. That's why I also you won't catch me going out around to somebody, even like those guys, and being like, oh, you guys need to break up because this is a toxic relationship. Because what needs to be solved isn't that they need to be told to break up. They need to be shown a love and understanding, being given help, find healing, so that they don't even choose to do that in the first place. And that's the difference in society today. A lot of people are very prescriptive, like, do this. We're always doing things for the outside, right? But we don't deal with things on the inside, and what is on the inside is what will come to the outside. So therefore, if they internally, because I was watching an interview of Chrisean Rock, right, the other today. I was watching her. She did an interview. She was on the podcast with B. Simone and Megan Ashley, which I love those two, right? And I really respected how they dealt with her, right? And let's go ahead here and look at and compare two different types of interviews, right? So I watched the whole of that interview, and I watched some of the one they did on Shark Tank, I think it's called. Was that what it's called? I think that's what it's called. Anyway, they did an interview over there as well, and basically these two interviews were completely different, right? And it's all going to come down to exactly what I'm talking about, because when she was being spoken to, anyway, let's start with the B Simone thing, that podcast, which is called Know For Sure. What my point was going to be that she was explaining that she sticks by Blueface. Obviously they're not together now, but we're talking about this as far as understanding the situation, and it's all going to make sense, guys, if you watch the whole thing. She stays with Blueface because she sees his progress, right? So this is the other thing you guys got to understand, that when somebody's in these scenarios, it's very easy for you to sit back on the outside and, like I said, judge what to do. But you have to be in a position where you're ready to listen. And that's why I think in this interview so much was, you know, taken out of her, was more understood about her, right? So she was basically explaining that their relationship started as a business thing, which she likes, and if it hadn't started as a business thing, she wouldn't have even been interested in the first place. But then it developed and she ended up growing love for him, and she's seen improvements in the way he behaves, and she believes that with time he can be the guy that she wants to be with, if that makes sense, right? And that he is actually trying to change. She believes in all this type of stuff. Now here's the point I'm trying to make here, right? So for her, this is probably the closest properly functional relationship she's had in a while, because I don't know if you guys know this about her parents, which I'm going to do a separate video about mothers and fathers and their roles and all this type of stuff as part of this series. So check that out. Is she obviously was the 11th child of 12, but her mum ended up becoming an addict and all this, that, and the other. She was homeless for a number of years. Her dad was incarcerated, all these types of stuff. She's grown up around dysfunction. She's lived her life in dysfunction. So you can't just tell somebody who is used to dysfunction. Dysfunction is the norm. You can't expect just telling them. That's why I say society is toxic for people who come from broken homes, because it's toxic to just say to them, you just need to do this, because that's what's normal. That's what she thinks is that's the reality that she lives in. Do you see what I'm saying? Of what she deserves and how things are supposed to operate. Even when it comes down to the abuse, guys, this is the other thing I think people fail to understand, right? Because a lot of us, we can be spoiled, right? And I honestly promise you guys, I thank God that I've been through so many of the horrendous things I've been through, because I can actually understand where people are coming from, unlike a lot of people in the world who can't relate because they didn't go through that. So you don't relate. And so stop trying to tell people what to do when you haven't been through it, because you don't know what you're talking about, right? So, you know, what was I going to say? The abuse, right? If you've grown up and the environment that you grew up in, the area that you grew up in, people fight. Like I saw this happen I was watching this series, and it was kind of also similar to like a Bad Girls Club type of thing, but this other girl did. I wish I could remember her name. And I was watching it just out of curiosity, realistically, because I like to see what goes on in different types of communities. And they had a bunch of girls in the house, and you know, it was kind of like, again, like the Bad Girls Club kind of thing. And these girls, there was one girl who every time she would fall out with the other girls, she'd start fighting, right? And another girl, she didn't understand why every time she would say something that the other girl didn't like, that the girl would start fighting. And so when it came down to it, they had like a little, you know, kind of counseling type of session. And but basically what came out of it was the girl who would always fight, that's what she grew up around, like not just like in her, I think, family environment, but I think in her overall community, people just fight. So to her, that's normal. The other girl was like, where she grows up, the environment that she grew in, the community and all of that, she didn't grow up around that, so that's not something she chooses to do. So when you're a person sitting there and judging somebody else, saying, oh well, this person is these guys are so abusive and she's so toxic and she's this. She even said, because this is how I realized this is what was happening, because as she was talking in the Know For Sure podcast, right, she was saying, that's exactly what she was saying. She was like, this is how we, like, this is, she basically said this, and I actually can understand, because I grew up in the exact, well, let's not even talk about that. She was basically saying that to her, when people show their like physical aggression, it means that they actually care, which I do get where she's coming from, because I've met people who will pridefully say that they're not abusive, or pridefully say that they don't get angry, but the fact that they don't get angry is actually because they don't care. So them sitting there on their high horse, there is no sense of passion behind them because they don't care. So I get how in her brain she's equated that to, we fight and I fight because I care or because we love each other. I'm not saying that's healthy, guys. I'm just trying to get us to understand where these people are coming from, right, in these scenarios. And again, this is where society is toxic, because in society people would just say, oh, you're just abusive. Whereas in her mind, that's not how she's seeing it. If you can't even understand that, and this is where a lot of people are today. This is where a lot of people in society, and this is why we're failing a lot of people, and this is why a lot of people stay in these types of environments and stay in these types of relationships and stay unhappy and continue in dysfunction, because we keep, kind of judging and assuming and trying to prescribe something that we don't understand, rather than getting to the crux of what it was, right? So what Chrisean Rock doesn't need is you telling her, oh, you're just being abusive, you need to get away from her, this is just an abusive couple, you shouldn't hit each other in a relationship. People need to help her to understand there are other ways you can show your passion in a relationship without, and there's things that you should do, and it's not good to get into the habit of physically hurting each other, because you could hurt each other, and it's not a healthy way to deal with anger. And now she even said, which again, she for me is very much on the path to come out from this, and obviously she's a believer in God, so she seems to be really into that now as well. She was saying that now she's actually started to separate herself from the situation, because the conversations that him and her were having were showing her that this violence thing isn't a good thing, and that what might be another option is maybe I should just she said something like, one time she just left the house, she just got in the car and she just drove off, because she figured even though really she should say something and explain what she's doing, she felt it was better to if she was going to get heated, like, let me just separate myself from the situation so that it doesn't have to get to that level. And that's where we see healing, guys, and that's where we see growth, because again, actions have a root. They have a root cause of where they come from. So just telling somebody not to do something, that's why I like when people are like have addictions and stuff. Yeah, I always say it's interesting how people be so quick to be like, oh, this person's addicted to this, like you really need to cut this. And people can be very judgmental. Again, this is why society is toxic to broken people. It's like there is a reason why this thing started in the first place, and there's a reason why this thing is continuing. So if we don't rip things out at the root cause, right, then of course this stuff isn't going to stick. Of course this person's going to continue to relapse. You know what I'm saying? And so telling them, oh, you've relapsed 10 times, like you just must not, be serious, you just must not be this, and adding all this condemnation and shame and guilt onto them, that's only going to make it worse. What's going to make it better is getting to the root of how this stuff started in the first place. Because do you think, realistically, guys, do we really think that people are happy to be in such toxic relationships? Do you not think that Chrisean and Blue Face, when they were together, do you not think they want to be in a healthy relationship? They want to be happy. She even said it herself. She was actually realized that all this stuff, like, was it her who said this? Because I've been researching for so many videos today. Was it her who said this? I don't know if it was her who said this, but these guys have a lifestyle that a lot of people would want, but do you think this is the type of relationship? They're looking at other people with relationships like they would want, and they're trying to work towards that. She even said she's always wanted to be married. She wants to have children, right? And so anyway, that's why people end up in these scenarios, guys. A lot of the time, these relationships are better than any other thing they've ever had before anyway. So as far as they're concerned, they've actually moved forward. They've actually progressed, right? Second of all, right, is a lot of society makes it hard for these types of people, because we're so judgmental that, like, going through the things you go through, especially people who go through a lot, when you go through a lot, let me tell you, I can understand a lot about how she conducts herself. And let's think about society today. Imagine Chrisean Rock, what the society, the background she comes from. Listen to the rhetoric, a lot of this red pill movement, right, saying how women today are like this, women today are like that. When people are so hard and fast about their opinions of either side, it can cause for you as the person to then feel not good enough and then just give up altogether. Do you know what I mean? So for example, like, if you're a woman, right, let's say you're a woman, you've been through a lot, you've realized that your actions, let's say for the last 5 years, let's say your actions for the last 5 years, you realize all a result of you get to the crux of why you behaved the way you behaved for the last 5 years, but you've already done a lot of things that people would have an issue with. You've already had an OnlyFans. You've already done all of this, right? Things that you've now been completely written off as a wife, as far as a lot of men are concerned. And that type of stuff, it does get to us as women. That's why I don't think people understand, because you're saying that, like, sorry that I had I came from a dysfunctional past, and that I'm trying to do my best going forward. Right? Sorry that I can't go back and replace the fact that these things didn't add up for me. And that's what I also think pushes these types of women into these types of relationships, because it's like, how is she even, imagine how hard it would be for her to even perceive that a man who would be better for her would even be interested in her in the first place, because of the climate, again, of modern day society. And it works both ways. Us ladies do that as well when it comes to the gentleman, right? We'll be like, this is the type of man I want. He better be like this, 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 this. Great, but then men are hearing this and they're like, well, I mean, I want to be a good father, but I ain't had a father. I want to be a good husband, but I ain't seen a good husband. I want to be able to look after my wife and stick by her, but I don't know how to do that. I want to be able to provide for my family, but I ain't never seen a man who, you know what I mean, and stuff like that. And I want to be able to love one person and be in an intimate relationship with one person and be committed, but I haven't seen that. And unfortunately, I've already delved into many different oceans of ladies around there at this point anyway. And so you might write me off and say that, oh, I'm just another F-boy, even though I can't even prove myself to you because that was just a thing, that was a phase. And so we as women again do the same thing where we make it hard. So then yes, of course, as a blue face is gonna, you know, then again also go with like a Chrisean Rock, because they're gonna understand each other. And that's how these things work, guys. People in these situations, yes, a lot of the time it's trauma bonds and it's toxic bonding and whatever, right? But they actually are with somebody who can relate to what they're going through, because there's nothing worse than being in a relationship with somebody that's like, oh my gosh, like I'm like freaking perfect, and you're like, oh, you did that like in your past, like. And that's again how toxic society is, because a lot of people wouldn't want to open up in their relationship about things that they've done or the things that they've been through, because they'll feel, people will make them feel less than, guilty, condemned. You know what I mean? Like, oh wow, is that really what you did? Oh no, like, you know what I mean? So anyway, that's why I think people like this get together in relationships. It's sad, but I think the only solution to any of this, well, we're going to talk about this in different parts, because we're going to talk about all of this in all these different videos, but the only real solution to all of this, first of all, is God, always. Because that's what I believe this, because I know that when God changes, when you change on the inside, it changes how you conduct yourself on the outside, right? And I've seen that in my own life. Like when the way that I value myself, the more I actually truly value myself, that no one has to tell me about how I should dress outside. No one has to tell me about why I shouldn't just be having sex with all these different guys. No one has to tell me that, because the value that I have gained within myself is going to affect how I conduct myself, because that's how I see myself now. Do you see what I'm saying? And that's what we need to be focusing on, right? And not judging people, not condemning people, because that's another thing. And I'll just finish with this one, right? That causes people to stay in these situations. Like when I was looking at the other interview, right? So this no jumper, no sharp tank, whatever interview, the guys on there, the men on there, the way they were treating Chrisean, right? And I can actually so relate to the situation that went down, because it's very subtle. When the interview started, she was being very sweet and cute. She was like, hi, thanks for having us, you know, like the usual. And they were just there. And the interviewer was asking her like, oh, who's a man, by the way. He's like, why were you crying earlier? When you came in, you were crying. And she was like, I don't know, like I can't really think of why I was crying. Maybe it was because of my period, maybe it was because I'm pregnant. And that's, as a woman, we know this is normal. We just get emotional sometimes. We don't know why, okay? We don't know why. Sometimes we just do. And usually it is around these types of hormonal shiftings going on. You know what I'm saying? And so she kind of just like, yeah, that's all. And he was like, but you can't, but how can it be your period? You can't be on your period and pregnant, and blah, 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 which he basically had just not understood what she meant, because he was trying to say, how can you be on your period and pregnant? And she was trying to say it could be either, and it took them ages. And she even said, when he wasn't getting it, she was like, can we just not talk about this? And she asked so politely. So no one talks about this, right? In this toxic society we live in. She asked super politely. She was like, can we just not talk about this? Like, I prefer not to talk about this. And he kept asking, and he kept asking, and he kept asking, right? And then it goes on, like later on in the conversation, right? So again, this is her boundary. This is her boundary being disrespected. And this is what you guys don't realize. A lot of times that people who come from dysfunctional backgrounds, they're used to people not respecting their boundaries. And when somebody doesn't respect your boundaries, it means that, okay, well, obviously I don't matter, because you're not here respecting what I need from you. And then that's what then starts the downward spiral into all these toxic behaviors, because like, well, if I don't matter, it doesn't matter if I'm out here naked everywhere, it doesn't matter if I'm sleeping with anyone, because I don't mean anything and no one cares about what I have to say anyway, no one's respecting me anyway. And there's no sense of respect there, right? Later on in the interview, they were asked a question about the show, about when Blueface was bloody on his face or whatever. And one of the interviewers was like, can you tell us about how that happened? And so Blueface starts telling the story, and then Chrisean's like, are we really going to do that? Like, can we not talk about that, right? As in, like, I don't want you to tell them about this type of thing. And he's like, why he's like, and then they end up getting into an argument, because you're like, don't talk when I'm talking, you talk when I talk to you. See this again. So again, Now this is more of the things that she's either used to or she's going to put up with based on, oh, so you're treating me now like you just get to talk to me like I just have to shut up, like okay, what I have to say doesn't matter, you're not asking me why, you're not respecting me. And again, as a man, he should be covering her and protecting her. So she's clearly uncomfortable with him sharing the story. As a masculine good man, he should be respectful of that, right? And either way, if they're in a relationship and if he loves her, he should care. So even if he doesn't understand why, respectfully, he should be able to say, you know what, if this matters enough to the person I love, even if it doesn't make sense to me, why is it such a big, I should do that anyway. I never get that in couples. Like if you can do something for the person you love, right, it doesn't make sense to you, but you know it's going to make them happy, why does it have to make sense to you anyway? But that's another conversation for another day. So anyway, so then he continues on to tell the story. They start getting into an argument, and then he calls her a B word, and then she calls him a B word, and then they start to argue. And then the interviewer's like saying to her, like, he can call you a B word, but you can't call him a B word because he's a man, and on all of this stuff. And then Blueface himself was saying to her, like, what did he say to her? Yeah, he's like, and then so then they all get into this argument right now because she doesn't want him to share the story. She then calls the interviewer a B word, right? Because he's like, you're a B word as well. And I feel like now she was triggered. She came in nice, she came in sweet, she was open-minded. When she was doing all of that, she was being taken advantage of. She was being spoken down to. She was being patronized, right? She didn't want her boyfriend to share the story. He's sharing anyway. Everybody's ignoring her boundaries. Everybody's treating her like it doesn't matter. So when you start to feel, a lot of these people, when they start to get treated as if how they think and what they feel doesn't matter, they behave as if it doesn't matter and as if nothing matters. So yes, I am going to just go off the rails because who cares anyways? It's not like I'm important. It's not like I'm of value. It's not like it matters what I say. It's not like it matters how I feel. It's not like my life even matters. Do you see what I'm saying? And that's what ends up happening, because what the guys ended up doing in the end, and this is what got me, yeah, is what they ended up doing in the end was, what point was it? Oh yeah, what they ended up doing in the end is, after this little argument, then the interviewer guy says to Blueface, even though he can see Chrisean didn't want to say anything, he goes, okay, continue with the story, as in like, we're both going to just ignore her, like just go ahead with it, right? And then she's like, can I get a shot? And that's how it works, guys. This is what I'm trying to say. People be like, oh, she needs to stop the drinking. Why do you think she's drinking? Because she feels it's about what's going on the inside. Oh, I felt it so hard. The moment she said, can I get a shot? I knew that was the moment where she now knew the situation she was in. She wasn't in a situation where she was being looked after. She wasn't in a situation where she was being cared about. She wasn't in a situation where she mattered, her thoughts, her feelings, her life doesn't matter. What's the freaking point? I may as well just do this, because that's how people get there. So when people in society are telling people like her, like, oh, you should do this and you should do that, she needs love. She needs people who value her to come around her. And when she was on the other podcast, no, for sure, these girls were looking after her. They didn't give her any alcohol. They gave her ginger ale. They were hearing her out. She never lost it. In fact, it was so wholesome. They were all hugging. They were all like, we're going to be friends together. Can we pray together? It was a completely different thing, because she was in an environment with two women, and these two women were saying to her, we love you so much. As soon as we saw you, we just want to love on you. Like, we're going to be talking to you. Like, let's keep together. They'd spoken on the phone and they'd opened up about stuff. She was so calm on the interview. Every time she would do something a little bit, wild, she would just laugh. And then they should be able to be open and honest as well in a safe environment. So even when they were like, but maybe you should cut down, they were trying to say, so maybe you should cut down the amount of stuff you put, because she was trying to say like she likes to put everything out there because she wants to be transparent, but they were like, maybe we need a bit of a balance there, we need to cut it down. And then she kind of joked and she was like, yeah, you're right, but I'm a bit childish, and they all just kind of laughed about it. But there was growth, there was healing, there was love, there was acknowledgement. They acknowledged her, they told her how beautiful she was, they told her how God is using her, how important she is, and all of that type of stuff. And it created a completely different thing out of her, because that's the root cause. That's the root cause. Because then now people will say, oh, and then Chrisean got crazy on the No Jumper podcast because blah blah blah, she shouldn't have been drinking, she shouldn't have been being treated as if she didn't matter. That's what that shouldn't have been happening. Because as soon as she was being treated like, and that's why I say that we don't need to tell people to do something or not to do something. We need to treat them with love. And that's why I believe Jesus said that the two most important commandments were to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and to love thy neighbor as thyself. Treat your neighbor with the amount of grace you need to treat yourself, that you need. Forgive your neighbor the amount that you want to be forgiven. You know what I'm saying? Love your neighbor as you would love yourself. That's why he said that, because that is what is going to cause everything else to fall into place. That's where it all starts from. You see what I'm saying? And it was just so clear from both of those two positions. And then the girls were able to actually get out of her, like, well, what are your boundaries? Do you guys have, they're asking questions like, you and Blueface, okay, you're not prepared to leave him, right? But do you guys have boundaries? And then they were able to establish with her, like, yeah, so these are the boundaries in the relationship. And then they were able to actually speak life into her and say, well, if somebody treats you like this, that's not acceptable, you need to walk away. And then she could be in agreement. So now all the things that people think she's not learning, because it was just being judgmental, sitting self-righteously on their high horse, judging from a place of not even knowing what's going on, to people just hearing it out, loving her, having patience for her, and speaking life into her, they're actually having an effect. And that's how it's actually supposed to work. And that's what's actually going to stop people getting into relationships like Chrisean Rock and Blueface. And on that note, stay tuned for the other part of this. They're all going to be in a playlist all together. And let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. If life's a game, then let's play to win. God bless you all, and I'll see you in my next one.